I will say both parties seem quite interested in the mantra of Buy America. And I like to say that that's a great political tagline, but it's impractical in its implementation, in that we simply don't have the capacity or wherewithal that we once did to have everything be made in America.
Welcome to the Optimize podcast, brought to you by VisibleThread. The Optimize podcast is your go-to source for expert insights on BD, capture, proposal management, and government contracting. Each series is hosted by an expert in the field, bringing their unique experience and strategies to every episode. We're excited to have Marcia Watson as our host for this series. Marcia is a proposals operations expert who has led teams to grow contract wins from $600 million to over $2 billion. With years of experience, Marcia and her guests are here to help you navigate the complexities of all things GovCon. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on wherever you are listening. Now let's join Marcia on this episode.
Hello and welcome to the VisibleThread Optimize podcast. I'm Marcia Watson, CEO of BTW & Company. Today we're kind of looking at a different topic, a different general discussion of where we are right now in 2024 in the U.S., specifically related to the upcoming election and the potential for changeover activities that are related to a new president coming into office in January next year. So today I have with me two experts who have been following government acquisitions for careers, and I'll ask you each to kind of give me your bio and background on that. But I wanted to have a conversation about this changeover environment. What happens in federal contracting and bidding trends in an election and changeover year? So I'm looking forward to this discussion. I want to talk specifically about logistics and operational changes, not really talking about who we're voting for and why, but really what do we have as contractors to look forward to plan against, risks to mitigate, or opportunities to take when the federal government experiences a changeover like they will this year. So first, Gene, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hey, Marcia, thanks for having me here. I'm Gene Moran. I run a company called Capital Integration, where I help primarily defense and security companies navigate the Washington space and achieve dramatic outcomes, either through funding or policy influences. And I know we're talking about acquisition and contracting today. I spend the bulk of my energy with clients working on the front end of that process. So the requirements generation, the budgeting, and the appropriations that will underpin the eventual acquisition and contract. And it is an exciting time whenever there's an election. This particular one is turning out to be quite exciting and a bit unexpected. I will say over a year and a half ago, I predicted that neither President Biden or President Trump would make it all the way through. And we'll see how this goes.
We shall see. How about you, Mr. Larry Allen? Would you provide your introduction?
Marcia, thanks. It's great to be here. It's great to work with Gene. I'm Larry Allen. I've been in this business for 34 years, and I currently run Allen Federal Business Partners, where I work with a variety of government contractors, mostly on indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contracting issues, where I provide market research, relationship development assistance, and a heavy dose of contract compliance, because my motto is it's how much you keep in government contracting, not how much money you make.
Fantastic. That's another discussion in shorty. So we all know, like election years, they bring significant uncertainty and change into the federal contracting landscape. Some things that I've kind of identified in research is, there might be an increase in short-term contracts. We're going to change focus to what might be the political critical missions for the new administration. Obviously, budgets are always questionable every single year, but especially in a changeover year. And maybe some different approaches to best value versus LPTA bidding types, cost cutting. How do we become more affordable as we're also facing a little bit of inflation issues coming out of the current administration? So let's talk about some of those things, like what in general during a changeover year are just the kind of, yep, it's a changeover year. This is what we can expect. What has your guys' experience been in that?
I think there are things that happen regardless of who the winners are that sort of happen in sequence. We'll go through this period of either excitement or uncertainty about my team didn't win, and that really doesn't affect the day-to-day working of acquisition and contracting, in my opinion. I think what team wins really only obliquely affects the contract outcomes, and it may be more on the margins. But we're going to see a period. We will be in a CR as this election unfolds. I predict we will be in another CR that will extend into the new year, because regardless of the winner, it will be somebody who's not there today. That means that a budget has been developed on somebody else's watch, and everybody will want to at least pretend to reevaluate that budget before they formalize it. So that means late money coming in the fiscal year. We will be 5 or 6 months into the fiscal year again before appropriations are signed into law. That's my assessment. And that means that companies need to be prepared for this paralysis by analysis, where we will watch the problem, we will admire the problem, and we will be in sort of slow motion until suddenly an appropriation will be passed at the mid-fiscal year, and we'll be trying to choke down all of this money late again. We've seen it before for a variety of different reasons. So that's what I mean when I say these things will unfold in a knowable sequence regardless of who wins.
Understandable. Larry, your perspectives.
So I think that in terms of day in and day out government business, the regular order of business, that will continue to be done. Where I traditionally see some of the slowdowns is in any of the projects that get labeled with being innovative, or maybe larger projects that came about because they fit in with a specific administration's agenda. And when you lose a lot of the political appointees, which is something that I actually expect to happen between now and the election, regardless of who you think is going to win, this is just kind of when that occurs. You start to see some of those larger, maybe more marquee projects drop down a gear. There's certainly plenty of well-trained, extremely qualified career government people who can take those projects forward, but a lot of times they may ratchet their activity back a little bit and wait to see what new politicals do. I've spoken to more than one of the senior careerists over the course of my time, and they've said, look, we don't want to get halfway down with a new project that we're thinking about only to have the new appointee come in and say, well, no, we're going to go down this direction. And then they've already committed time, money, and resources to it, and they have to go back and do it again. So I think, if you're working on one of those larger, more marquee, maybe more political-backed projects, you'll see an impact. But the regular things will continue to get done. I think Gene's right on in terms of his forecast for appropriations. It's alarmingly so, but I think we can expect to see something in FY25 similar to what we saw in FY24, when you get appropriations out the door in that kind of late winter, early spring timeframe.
Yeah, which makes for a fun proposal season, that's for sure. So in that regard, let's talk about that for a little bit. Communication with the government and your government representatives. If you're speaking to somebody who is in an appointed position or somebody who reports in that appointed chain of command, what are some contingencies that contractors should be considering in how they're conducting their business development, how they're having those conversations?
Marcia, I always recommend to my clients that they talk to at least 4 different types of people when they're talking to a government agency, so that you're not keying in on any one person. A lot of people spend time on the customer, the end user, and that's appropriate. But if you spend all of your time talking to the end user, you're never really sure, for example, if other people in their agency want to do the same thing that they're talking about doing. So it's good to ask around and get at least another point of contact, maybe from the program manager or maybe from somebody else in the same office. Say, hey, we've been talking about doing this project. Is this really something that your office is going to fund and move on? Similarly, you want to talk to people in the financial world to make sure that your project's going to be funded. There is limited ability for agencies to reallocate money, but in between certain funds, it can be reallocated. And again, you don't want to go all in on a project only to find that the priority changed and that funding got cut in half. And then last but certainly not least are contracting officers. This is my plug. Contracting officers are people too. And you definitely want to talk to them while you're doing your business development, just so that you are not hanging all of your hopes on one person. And particularly with the CO, you want to get a sense of acquisition strategy. You also never want to take it for granted that they have an acquisition strategy, which gives you the opportunity to present one.
Gene, your perspective on that?
Yeah, when we're in periods of uncertainty, as we're about to enter, I encourage clients to speak with their outside voice. And by that, I mean, you need to be clear and forceful about why your ability to deliver something on cost and on schedule should be the highest priority or a higher priority than it may be presently viewed. If you're a manufacturer of something and you may be in a tight competitive space where there only are a few providers, if you would be hurt by the consequences of an extended CR, you need to make sure that people in government understand that, and that if you are at risk or you're being forced to operate at risk, you need to say that forcefully, because there are subtle little things that can be done, as Larry suggests, to move money around or make some short-term adjustment so that nobody wants to lose somebody from the industrial base over this government uncertainty. But underlying that ability to speak forcefully to delivering on cost and on schedule is really trying to look at it through the lens of the government buyer, wherever they are in the acquisition and contracting world. And as Larry suggests, there are multiple people involved. I like to refer to a constellation of people in your buying circle. It's multiple people, and not just in the executive branch. There can be industry people who may bring influence to an issue. There can be congressional people who can bring influence to an issue to make sure that you're at least getting a fair look if somebody's about to make a decision to defer, delay, or cancel your acquisition.
So let's talk about that. Like, what are some kind of nuance hints that you can see from the government? Like, what should contractors be looking for in terms of, as Larry addressed, like whether or not it's funded? Do we think there's going to be a changeover to this degree in the staff? What are some indicators that there might be a little bit more disruption in a certain agency or organization than there would be in others?
I would speak to the congressional marks are often an indicator that, to my amazement, they routinely surprise people in that when money does come to the executive branch, sometimes that's the first time a company is learning that, hey, their funding has been cut significantly or was at risk of being cut. And it could have been known months prior had they been tracking the legislative marks that occur, across government. That's not so difficult to find out. These are publicly available documents, but most people don't look at them. I think cash flow is always an indicator, right? If the government delays payment or defers payment, or if the prime vendor that you support is deferring payment for whatever reason, they may know something. I find with small business in particular, they are often at the mercy of a large prime, not only for the cash flow but for their source of information. And they have the ability to do their own homework and learn some of these very learnable things that I suggest.
Well, for those who might not know or be aware or even have considered that, the small business, in looking at this environment, maybe a new contractor who's just come in recently and hasn't made it through an administration changeover, what are some of the publicly available tools that they can access for that information?
Well, there is a full suite of things that are publicly accessible. You can find all of the legislative issues that Gene referred to on House and Senate websites. That's actually fairly easy to find. If I can find it and make use of it, then chances are your listeners can as well. There's also all kinds of information on spending trends. You have usaspending.gov that talks about it, and a lot of people look at that. But I would also encourage you, if you want to do a little deeper dive, to look at stuff like the Federal Procurement Data System that tells you a little bit more about who, what, and where the buying that's going on or not. Tells you one of the things that you get out of that system is the burn rate on specific contracts. So that can be one indication as to whether or not you're burned out or you've got a little time to go. That's one thing. But to get back to one of your earlier questions, Marcia, I think one other thing that companies can always look at, if they start hearing from their government contacts that they're going into continuity of operations planning meetings, COOP meetings, every agency has to go through this. If there's a threat, say, of a shutdown, or if there's a threat of a disruption in the market, which is not to say that it's actually going to happen, but by law, they're required to go through these continuity steps at certain times. And that is at best only a distraction from what people would be doing in the order of their normal business. At worst, it could lead to some very substantial changes.
I would add to Larry's excellent list that there are a variety of associations out there who serve multiple purposes. They don't just put on trade shows. Many of them offer quite substantive sort of redistribution of reports and summaries of reports and detailed understanding that stems from their great relationships with the government across multiple agencies in some cases. But they also have these associations have connectivity with the larger companies who have a full-time Washington presence and have research tools available to them and are able to devote the time and energy to that sort of thing. It can be easy to overlook that some of those tools are already being paid for as part of a subscription of membership, and you may just not be using them. So sometimes asking, "Hey, am I on the right mailing list, or do I have access to the correct database that is a natural part of a membership?" There are hundreds and thousands of associations, some much better and better recognized than others, but don't overlook those.
Yeah, absolutely. So then when we talk about small business in general, we know that there's usually changes associated with those administrative changeovers and how they're looking at federal small business contracting. Sometimes the goals change. Sometimes we get more emphasis for one set-aside type than another. For those contractors in those socioeconomic designations, what are some things that they should be considering as part of this changeover activity?
Well, Marcia, I think one of the things that's happening now is you're seeing so many of the small business rules being rewritten and readdressed in terms of government contracting. And I really think that for the most part, that's an effort that's going to continue regardless of what happens at the polls this coming November. It's things like the mentor-protege program, things like pass-throughs, certifications. What do you need to be eligible? And that's changing. And the idea is that it's all going to be tightened up a little bit with some transparency to make sure that the businesses are who they say they are. But if you're a business that's in that world, if you've got a special socioeconomic designation, if you're part of the mentor-protege program, you really need to be paying attention to some of these things that are going on right now, because they could really reshape your market for good or for ill. And you have an opportunity in most cases to make sure that your views are known, and you should take every advantage of those opportunities to let people know what you're thinking, so that people don't make decisions that provide more speed bumps in your government market that you probably don't need.
Absolutely. Team, from your side?
Yeah, I would just draw a distinction between the law and the policy here. So the law says 23% for small business set asides of the various categories, but it's policy that subdivides that. And I like to say that policy can be bent like a horseshoe. And so just as easily as we can make an adjustment to put emphasis in one direction or another, there can be exceptions and carve-outs, and it happens all the time. The other thing I would look at, or encourage small businesses to look at, some hold themselves back from breaking through that free and open barrier, whatever it might be for the individual NAICS code. I've had multiple clients fearlessly break through that and do quite well, competing for even bigger opportunities. So, let's not forget what these set-asides are really all about. It's an acknowledgement that access to capital is not the same in our country across those socioeconomic categories. And it's intended to try to help those companies have a fairer opportunity, at least as they're starting out as small businesses. But don't feel like you have to suppress your trajectory to stay in that category. It's okay to break through. And sometimes we lose sight of that.
Yeah, that makes for an interesting dynamic with some of the small businesses that they are able to get out of that small business designation, at least in that NAICS code, but then it puts them against that full and open market. In the context, again, of this changeover timeframe, what are some capture strategies that teams should be looking at when they think that an opportunity might head a different direction? I'm going more tactical. Larry?
Yeah, I would let Larry lead on that. Because I don't focus as much on capture. That's why.
No problem.
Well, I think capture strategies for smaller businesses need to take into account a couple of factors. One is that particularly when we're having a changeover in top people, your risk-averse government customer may become all that much more risk-averse. So emphasizing why you are the low-risk, experienced source, your reliability, who you surround yourself in terms of team members, their reliability and experience, that really should go some way towards alleviating any of the concerns that people might have about doing business with you. Of course, if you're a newer market entry, partnering with people who are experienced, who you can leverage that benefit from is important. And it's important anytime, but I think it's particularly important now. And also understand that some of it has to do with what it is you're trying to capture. Are you trying to capture business that is on a new project that has some higher visibility, or is this a follow-on to something that's already being done? Because the higher visibility it is, the more maybe its size there is to the project, the more media attention there is around it, the more you're going to want to have to make sure that everybody knows what your capabilities are and that you can handle the project that could come your way.
Absolutely. Gene, anything from that perspective?
I would just offer that I know, as we're recording this and really as we publish, we will be in advance of the election, but there could be some considerable changes in the senior executives and the senior government officials in any of the agencies, depending on who wins. Former President Trump has made clear his intent to look more carefully at what some of the long-term government positions are all about. I think if it were Vice President Harris who wins, there is maybe some desire to keep a level of continuity, and there are some very high performers in any government administration that they might try to keep in place or continue on in a new administration. But in that interim, when decision makers are are uncertain about their own situation, and they might be evaluating what's their next career move, that can have this feeling of a sort of a weight on the whole process that to just kind of, as Larry used the term, causes people to gear down a little bit, and that it manifests itself as a gearing down. Just something to watch for.
So let's continue that conversation a little bit. So, looking at kind of President Trump's first term in office, obviously Harris looking at possibly a continuation of some of the Biden initiatives, but she's going to want to put her own spin on it. Looking at critical missions inside the U.S., what can one expect in terms of, do we think President Trump is going to come back and try to reinstate some activities or things that have kind of come down as in the last 4 years? What do we kind of think is going to be the changing of the status quo back to or away from prior activities in either of these administrations, with that incumbent history being, a thing?
I will say both parties seem quite interested in the mantra of Buy America. And I like to say that that's a great political tagline that certainly excites voters, but it's impractical in its implementation, in that we simply don't have the capacity or wherewithal that we once did to have everything be made in America. And that's why there are so many exceptions and carve-outs. So we may see some big swings made by a President Trump or a President Harris to say this is how it will be. We've seen Congress try to do that by legislating in certain industries, and often it's proven to be just impractical, and so there have to be exceptions made. So I say that companies, regardless of their size, who have knowledge of specific industries or elements of industries, have an equal opportunity to step forward and communicate. I'll say in the Trump administration, we saw the use of executive orders to make declarative statements and sort of work around the legislative process. That any president has certain executive powers to do those kinds of things until the Supreme Court says you can't do that. But he was fairly ready to use executive orders that were not super complex, and they weren't, in the case of President Biden's AI executive order, that's 16 pages long. That I think it's the longest one on record. President Trump was fairly decisive in his use of those, and I would think he will try to do it again because it's a quick way to get to a desired position.
I would concur with that. I think another thing that we could expect to see out of a second Trump administration would be ratcheting down some of the regulations that impact government procurement. During the first Trump administration, we saw them work overall, not just in terms of acquisition, but overall in the regulatory framework, 2 regulations out for every 1 new regulation in. And I think we can expect to see that type of thing again. I think also anytime you have a Republican administration come in, you can expect to have a look at A76, which is the OMB circular on what serves as an inherently government function and whether or not industry should be given the opportunity to perform some of those. So that could very well be on the agenda. For Vice President Harris, I think I would expect to see a continuation of their regulatory agenda in terms of pro-union labor things, work agreements, project labor agreements, things like that. In addition, continuing the work that has already begun on sustainable acquisition. They're rewriting the entire chapter of sustainable acquisition in the federal acquisition regulations. But then they're also, at the meantime, talking about greenhouse gas emissions and other things that are environmental in nature, things that don't really have a net core part of government acquisition, but government acquisition is being used as the train to achieve some of those ends.
Yeah, and I think in terms of, FAR compliance and those sorts of things, we certainly see those influences coming in with new FAR clauses or adaptions of FAR clauses from, right of first refusal is something that kind of switches back and forth that I've seen. Or, obviously the AI is going to be another thing that needs to be regulated. So let's touch on that because we can't have a podcast without talking about AI. Just in general, because I've always said, and I don't want to be on this topic long, I've always said that the risk for the proposal industry and business development industry right now with artificial intelligence, I have two philosophies on this. One, when you have artificial intelligence suggesting your response and then artificial intelligence evaluating your response, that kind of takes a lot of the, technical human elements out of it. Is the government looking at that in one way? And then in the larger, just how AI has become so prevalent in our conversations. And in another podcast, we even talked about the load of data that is required for an AI response and the environmental impacts of being able to run AI servers and those sorts of things. Do either of you have any insights or perceptions into what kind of those perspectives are inside either of these administrations?
I have some concerns about how we will approach this. I recently sat on an Axios editorial board that was about the intended path of regulation for AI. And the consensus in the room among 25 experts was that the government would likely go down a similar path that they did with regulation of cybersecurity, which is to say it will take forever and they will put the burden on small business to pay for whatever sort of compliance is required. I will say I was a lone voice at that table that said you cannot do this to small business again, expecting them to pay for the security concerns these are national security issues, and there should be some government support for that. I personally thought that bringing the likes of Elon Musk and Bill Gates and other luminaries to the table with Senator Schumer and other senior congressional leaders, that's exactly the wrong way to approach this. There are some AI leaders at the very highest levels of big tech, but in terms of regulatory implementation, this will be years, if not decades, of policy reconfiguration. This will look like tax legislation, in my opinion. There will be so many nooks and crannies to it as we go along.
And we've definitely seen that already starting to happen with agencies, each doing their own AI approach, their own AI reviews. Congress kind of got into the AI game and acquisition a little bit late, but now it's furiously playing catch up with bills that they introduced in the spring and summer this past year. So I would expect to see some forward movement on those. But I think the word patchwork is one that we will hear a lot more. If Vice President Harris wins the election, I think we'll continue to see her administration use the AI framework laid out in the Biden administration's AI executive order. Conversely, President Trump has said already that he will not abide by that, and he thinks that AI executive order is overly prescriptive in terms of not supporting innovation and broad thinking. Not sure what that would be replaced with, but certainly there are two different minds there from each candidate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for everybody, there's probably, many different opinions on this subject, but I've always said until it's regulated, use with caution. I think personally that there runs the potential of bids being disqualified for their use of AI, because how do you know? How do you know where this idea came from? I think that, and we've talked about this, and again, it's not necessarily privy to this conversation, but in those terms of how acquisitions are going to be written, and tying not just to AI, but different political influences, pricing strategies, staffing strategies, down to the nitty gritty. And this is probably another Larry question. When you're looking at opportunities and the broader scope, what kinds of those FAR regulation impacts can companies expect to see if some of those clauses change?
Well, I think we can expect to see the continuation of new rules and regulations that place new burdens on contractors. Really, frankly, under either administration. You'll probably see a little bit more of that under a Harris administration, but there are already so many proposed and interim rules in the pipeline that they're all going to have to make their way through the process. Many of them are going to end up being implemented regardless of who sits in the White House or at the Office of Management and Budget. So, we're talking about things like pay equity and transparency. We're talking about where you get your semiconductors from. We're talking about some of these things that are intended to, on first look, impact only large businesses that are maybe doing a lot of high-end defense work. It doesn't just affect those companies. It affects all kinds of companies. We saw this happen with rules on telecommunications use, and the broadest impact of that is not on telecommunications companies. It's on every other type of contractor, regardless of size. So I think we'll continue to see that. My hope would be that we get to a point where people take a look at some of these regulations and say, look, we don't need to have all of these, particularly for commercial item acquisition. I've been in government procurement long enough to remember when we actually did that. And it wasn't a partisan issue either. It was very bipartisan. And hopefully we can get back to that point, because if you take DOD and DHS at face value and say, we want new businesses, we want innovation, we want non-traditional contractors, you're not going to get that by continuing to expand the FAR.
Absolutely. Gene, anything to add?
No, I think I've spoken my piece on AI.
Got that one covered. Let's move on. So let's go broad now, right? We've talked small business. We've talked implications of big things happening in the U.S., but let's go global. VisibleThread is an Irish company, and they do have work and clients in the EU. So what do we think from U.S. federal government contracting perspectives on an international market? Any major changes to like overseas operations, any of those initiatives underway?
From a national security perspective, I see us as a country struggling a bit to determine where do we want to fit into this global landscape. It seems to be changing, at least from the perspective of the electorate. I think our citizens are less inclined to want to be fully engaged. I dislike the term world's policeman, but it's a simple way for people to look at it, that we need to be everywhere. I would say, though, that a reason that we do need to have a global presence is to maintain a flow of commerce and to have these economic ties that really fuel the world and supply the world. Many Americans would be shocked to learn how much of the goods that they consume on a daily basis arrive by ship from a foreign port. And it's not all from China. China certainly has a lot, but we have a lot of European partners. We were talking about in the competitive landscape where there might be a push to buy American. For a lot of capabilities, we need to what's being called friendshore capability and use that capacity of our allies. So the degree to which we can stay connected with our economic system and with our methods of commercial transport, I think it's vital, and it underpins any contract that we're talking about here.
Yeah, I would agree with that and add to it in saying that one of the issues that's really been coming to the fore in defense, which I dabble in from time to time, is rare earth minerals and the components that are critical to going into not only weapon systems, but to commercial technologies that people make part of their everyday life. And, one of the things that this country needs to do, and an area where our allies could potentially help, is looking for ways so that we lessen our dependence on sourcing from one or two countries that may or may not be inclined to continue to supply the things that we need. And we also should be looking not just at our friends, but at ourselves. What do we have here that we can do? And understanding what the trade-offs are between having a sound environmental policy, but also being able to provide more for our own national defense. Those are some discussions that I hope would take place during anybody's next administration. But I absolutely think that, it's not going to change overnight. We're going to need to continue to rely on our friends and others to provide us with critical equipment and services for any type of reasonable future. So we have to understand that, and as Gene said, be engaged in the global market.
So I want to change topics a little bit. I appreciate this conversation so far because it's giving a lot of different things for contractors to think about, like we don't already have enough. And allowing, I think, looking at C-suites and different organizations. And I'll tell you my personal anecdote, and it is a minor contribution to this very intelligent discussion with the two of you. I started my career at one of the top 10, large federal government contractors during the operations overseas, enduring freedom in Iraqi. Oh, now I lost it. During the Iraq wars. So in that time period, this particular organization did a lot of work with MedCom, military health, and all of those things for the warfighter, for the warrior. And as those operations were drawing down, this large federal contractor was surprised to see their work going to small, disadvantaged veteran-owned businesses, service-disabled veteran-owned businesses, sorry. And it seemed to me like, boy, that was going to be kind of obvious, but I was new to contracting and didn't really want to speak up on the matter. But looking at things of that nature, of, changes in the environment that require adjustments from the federal government, what should businesses look at from a pipeline perspective, looking at recompetes coming up? How can they understand kind of what might be in jeopardy, how they kind of, as we started the conversation, might have to turn their selling into a different avenue. They might have a different audience at the recompete. They might have a different KO or contracting officer. What should businesses have an eye out for right now for pipeline development? Larry, I'll take it to you.
Sure. So for pipeline development, I think it's going to be super critical to look and see where the changing priorities are, if in fact we have changing priorities. And again, President Harris's administration would probably continue some of the things and priorities being done by the Biden administration. But don't forget, we are going to have, I think, a battle royale over the next few months on FY25 appropriations, and it's not going to always break down towards the traditional sides. We've got a lot of deficit hawks who are primarily about reducing the deficit, even though they might traditionally be pro-defense spending, for example. So you're going to have to watch that process. And as Gene said, it's going to be a process that's long and strung out. And indeed it is. One of the things that I'm concerned about in this is the delays in getting the defense authorization bill done. There doesn't seem to be any sense of urgency in the Senate to get that done. And that should be starting to make contractors a little bit nervous. I wouldn't hit the alarm bell yet, but I definitely think you ought to go down a level, so you're at least at that little yellow area of caution that you're paying attention to it, because those could affect recompetes. Those could absolutely affect projects that you think you're going to be doing. If you are also, depending on your socioeconomic designation, The Department of Veterans Affairs is going to continue to be a good place to do business. I think the Department of Homeland Security is going to continue to be a good place to do business. So the pipelines that you have inside of those agencies should continue to do well. I always also recommend my clients that they have one or two acquisition approaches to recommend, even if it's a recompete. You pointed out, Marcia, you could have a new KO, and you certainly could. Different KOs have their own favorite acquisition methods. Never assume that they've got one planned, and present one or two that are in their best interest to consider, but also allow you to compete.
Yeah, I would add, I teach public policy at Florida State University, and one of the things that we convey is this concept of the salience of an issue, like how important is it in relative terms, but that there are always multiple sides to an issue, and in this time of an election season, and I would say, looking at the President Trump administration, things were typically presented as black or white, yes or no. There's two sides to it. There are always more than two sides to any public policy issue, and that creates opportunity. In seminars that I run with clients and just people in my network, one of the exercises we do is we look at the front page of the Wall Street Journal on any given day and see how you can connect any story to your business, because there is a way to make a connection there. And, I said I work in the defense and national security space. I'd echo Larry's comment that with defense and homeland security, those opportunities are ever present. I've been in it in the dark days of sequestration, and there was opportunity then. But, the global players that we were talking about have a vote in how our government will ultimately divide the money. And so those opportunities to protect the nation and protect the infrastructure will be ever present. I would urge the audience to use your imagination when looking at what could the impact of something be on my business. Often we're so focused on meeting the next deadline, meeting cash flow, which is a legitimate concern, or making the next opportunity that might be in the next quarter. Somebody in the company has to be thinking big. I help companies with that strategic approach. How do you influence things in the next 12 to 18 months that you can truly influence, and just disregard some of those things that you can't, so that you're thinking about the big picture. If somebody's not connecting those dots for your company, you're likely missing opportunities.
I think that's an excellent point. One of the things that I've been writing about lately is that no company should take anything for granted right now. No defense contractor in particular. You've got to watch the process, even though you may not always want to see how the sausage is made. It's how it's made and what goes into it is going to have an impact on your business. Not only do you want to look at it, you want to have an opportunity to weigh in on it while it's being considered.
Absolutely. I think both of those are great points, because, a lot of what I witnessed and coming from a proposal department, right? I've never been a crucial cog in the C-suite. However, I did always have a bit of a voice of, this is what we need to be looking out for. And I really think that, companies and what I witness in my small business itself and the consulting that we provide, small businesses are inundated. They're swamped. They're overloaded. The C-suite just doesn't have time. What are the stop and thinks that we need to remind our executive leadership inside of these businesses of from your back office to your customer facing, like pulling on that string a little bit further. C-suite, open your eyes. We need to look at X, Y, and Z. Are there things that you guys see in your consultant relationships that that businesses are just not able to focus on, that they really should switch their focus to at this point?
Marcia, I think you nailed one of them, and that is that smaller businesses in particular that are going well and growing, congratulations, that's not easy always. They typically will add resources to what I call the front of their house. That is sales and marketing people. And so sales and marketing people are all very important, but so too are the back office operations. You need different infrastructure if you're now a $500 million or $50 million company from when you were a $10 million company. In my experience, company executives usually will staff up and grow the front of their house, but not backfill the infrastructure for the back of their house. And that's when you can get yourself into some trouble, not understanding what the rules are that you're needing to comply by, the reports that you have to file, the contract terms that you're obliged to follow. And when you start getting to those higher dollar volumes of business, you get on people's radar screens from the compliance community. And, this is my plug. Compliance is pennies on the dollar. So if you're expanding the front of your house, you should be looking at expanding the back as well.
Absolutely. Gene, any perspective?
Yeah, I would offer that, when you talked about this, the C-suite leader, look up. Being busy is not the goal. And you can be busy all the time. You can just do everything and be noodling over options or checking somebody's work or double checking somebody else's work that's already been checked. That's not a good use of a leader's time. I say that's the opposite of what leadership is. If you're touching these things all the time, I think what Larry's describing was really how our company's preparing to scale, and there are different ways to do it. Some it's with how they access capital or investors. Others, it's how they maybe partner and buy into a capability or a market. I would also encourage not to just get bogged down in the org chart. Moving boxes around on an org chart is really easy to do, and it can be very satisfying. It's one of those things that it feels good when you come up with a new plan. This is how we're going to organize, but it can inform how you're staffing the scaling you're talking about. And I think Larry's hitting on a key point here that you have to move the entire organization, not just the outward facing part of it that brings in the revenue. If you can't execute on those new opportunities, you're not long for this world.
Absolutely. And that's advice for every day. But I think in a changeover as well, I know from the last administration changes as President Trump came in, there was a full turnover of where folks were looking. Civilian agencies took a hit. Operations moved, towards border security and those sorts of things, and it did take a lot of readapting for companies to understand, like, oh, where I thought I could go, I can't get there anymore, at least not for the next few years. So let's talk about that, some of the implications in the civilian agencies as we change over these administrations.
Well, I think if you're looking at the civilian agencies, there are a couple of agencies that will continue to do well generally. Maybe not every part of the agency. Like there will be winners and losers inside the Department of Homeland Security, for example. That's an agency that has very decentralized business models and offices. So you'll see things like Customs and Border Protection probably continue to do well. TSA, Air Force, who knows? Or Coast Guard, rather, who knows? That's a little bit more difficult to forecast. But the other agency in the civilian world that's going to continue to do well is the VA. There's no political stomach for either side of the political spectrum to scrimp on veterans. This has been a key oversight issue over the last several years. And again, it's not necessarily a partisan one. It can be one, in fact, where each party tries to outdo the other to see just how much can be done for veterans. So I would expect the Department of Veterans Affairs to do well. In a Trump administration, some of the civilian agencies might not do as well if you're talking about commerce and education, EPA, agencies such as that. But even there, keep in mind that while the executive branch has a lot of control, what happens in the congressional elections this November are going to determine a lot as well. You know, this year and last year, we've seen the Senate in particular negotiate among Republicans and Democrats for a formula, essentially. I'll give you this for defense if you give me this for civilian agencies. I would expect to see a certain amount of that continue, particularly if we continue to have split party control in each chamber. So you have to watch those elections too and understand what they mean for your business. What they mean for your business could be the same or different from what they mean for you in your personal life, depending on where you are. But you have to look at both.
Yeah, I was leaning toward the congressional response as well, in that sometimes in periods of uncertainty, agencies, veterans is a perfect example. They will wait to be told what to do. And who tells them what to do? It's not always the president. It's often Congress, either in words or in terms of the dollars that are sent their way. Hearings are a great way to get an early indication of what are the positions. So regardless of who controls each chamber, and I could make a case either way for both the House and the Senate to flip. I think there's enough uncertainty in the air in just the political environment that either chamber could flip. It's possible that we could see this go all one way, or we could have another period of divided government. But those whoever is in charge will control the committee staffs and decisions about who are those professional staff members. I hate that term. They're all professionals, but there's a term called PSM. They oversee individual agencies, and understanding what motivates them, what gets talked about by their bosses in hearings. And again, those transcripts are publicly available. Summaries of those transcripts can be had at a very low price through a variety of subscriptions. The AI tools have gotten better and better. It's very easy to understand this in a much more sophisticated way, but often, again, we lack imagination, or we think that that's just a black box that we can't access. But it's filled with information that could inform somebody's thought leadership within their own company.
Yeah, certainly. And then I want to talk a little bit about infrastructure in terms of U.S.-based construction activities, military growth, any of those things that have kind of been neglected over the last few years that might need or adjust in this changing political environment. I'm thinking back to BRAC closures back in the day. Is there anything like that is going to be an impact?
I'm thinking of the year-long effort at having an infrastructure week next week in President Trump's reign. We were promised an infrastructure week for months, and it never came about. President Biden took a big swing. I think he thought he had limited opportunity, and so took a big swing on infrastructure. It includes a lot of things that don't deal with infrastructure, but it's only now just unfolding in terms of the flow of funds to some of those opportunities. I personally don't see a BRAC in our future, and I say that because communities have become so resilient in terms of how they defend against BRAC. I live in Florida. Every major military population center has sort of an anti-BRAC council associated with it. It resides within the economic development commissions. Resides in governor's offices. They are now highly effective at responding and creating all kinds of negative headlines for a BRAC. It doesn't mean that we don't need it, because we are carrying a lot of excess infrastructure capacity. In some cases, it dates back to World War II era. We don't have the ability to recapitalize those large bases, and they're just a drag on the process.
Larry, any take on that?
I think we have seen in the past 2 or 3 years in Congress and with this administration, and frankly, it started with President Trump when he was still in office, a lot of work, a lot of money being dedicated to infrastructure overall. And Some of that goes to the Department of Defense. Some of it goes other parts of the economy. I'm not sure what type of appetite there would be to do anything major on the type of scale that we've recently seen. Gene points out that a lot of that's already been started has yet to be unfolded. And there may be a desire between a lot of people on the Hill to see how that unfolds and how it goes before they do anything large again. Having said that, I think if you have a certain outcome for the November elections, one party traditionally funds and focuses more on infrastructure than the other, you could certainly see an infrastructure bill coming down in 25 or 26. That, again, would probably not focus just or even mainly on DOD. But as Gene points out, DOD does need to be part of it because they've got to have some facilities that if they were civilian facilities in charge of being run by the General Services Administration, they'd probably have been shut down by now.
Absolutely. Well, we're coming up on time, and we've been steering this conversation in different directions. And I love the fact that it kind of ends on community. So if either of you had a topic that you wanted to discuss and we haven't, but let's try to get into some of that conversation, just people to people, general relationships as we're all going through this election together. I think it's bringing a lot of stress and just anxiety because it could literally go any way. It could, we could flip the houses of Congress. We could bring them back into a single party. In these kind of anxious, curious times that we all have for each other, what do you guys advise in the weakest sense of the term? Just maintain perspective, maintain, just a community, a camaraderie. How do you guys have feelings on that?
I like to talk about our ability to communicate. I co-wrote a book with Alan Weiss called $1 Million Influence, and it's all about using some of the most obvious tools that we have available in communicating our desired outcome with whoever the audience is. Whether it's Congress, whether it's in the executive branch and any level of the executive branch. Too often, we come into meetings unprepared for taking command of the meeting or to be able to take command of the meeting to drive toward an outcome, to help orient and reframe that audience immediately to why what it is that you're trying to do makes so much sense. I use what I call the 8-minute rule of messaging. That's being able to not convey an elevator pitch, but to be able to tightly control what it is that you're trying to accomplish. There's an issue, the background, the discussion, and a specific recommendation. When you can link that in a short period of time, you immediately frame it for the audience. You allow time for questions, and you're likely going to be able to give them time back. You won't need the allotted time that you were offered, which means you get to come back and you get seen in a way that's credible. This time of transition, it's like any other time in that there is always opportunity. And those that are best prepared to take advantage of the opportunity always have positive relationships and always get to come back and do it again and keep winning. And it just compounds over time.
Absolutely. Larry, I see the head nod.
Exactly. I think Gene's exactly right. Relationships matter in government business. The most successful businesses are the ones that understand both the relationship and process parts of this market. And so in terms of people who are transitioning in and out, as a contractor, you want to make sure that you're maintaining as many relationships as possible and that you're open to creating new relationships with people who might be coming in who have the ability to shape your business one way or the other, whether those people are going to be on Capitol Hill or in the executive branch. You have to take the time and invest in developing those relationships. You also have to know the process. Both are important, but we've talked already today about how the process might change. So let's not forget the relationship side of this. The other thing I would say to people is, I've been in this business for a while. I like to say when I had hair, but nobody believes me. But government procurement trends come and go. Markets fluctuate. Things get better. Things get not so good. But the government market is here to stay. It's not the same government market from year to year, and especially not 5 years to 5 years. So you have to pay attention and be on top of those changes. But the government market will be here. There will be opportunities if you're prepared to pursue them.
I think that's it. It's the human element. It's paying attention. It's self-advocacy, all of those things, self-preservation sometimes, but being aware of your surroundings and what potential implications that might allow for you, but also just being aware of yourself. Where is your company sitting right now? What is your long-term strategic plan? Yes, it's kind of like investments, right? Just let it ride, see where we can go. But you have to be able to navigate those ebbs and flows, the wins and the losses and all of those things, and understand that does change under different administrations and in different political landscapes, cultural ones as well. And I think there's probably going to be some implications there as well. Gene, any last closing thoughts?
It's an exciting time. I'm thrilled at the potential because I know that good things are out there. I look forward to continuing to help clients as they try to navigate what looks to be just unnavigable terrain. It is quite learnable, and you do just have to jump in. If you need a guide, get a guide.
Absolutely. How about you, Larry?
I'll take a cue from the music man, Professor Harold Hill. You've got to know your territory.
Absolutely. So true. And networking, because I wouldn't have met either of you without my personal network. So I'm certainly grateful for that. So excited to have had you here on this episode with me. But to wrap it up and to close it up and summarize, by closely monitoring the political landscape, understanding agency priorities, proactively managing risks, contractors can increase their chances of success in this challenging environment of an election changeover. You just have to be paying attention. So thank you for joining us on the Optimize podcast. Thank you very much to both of you as well. Have a great day.
And that wraps up this episode of the Optimize podcast. A big shout out to our amazing host, Marsha Watson, and our guests, Gene Moran and Larry Allen. You can connect with Gene and Larry in the links in the description. Optimize is brought to you by VisibleThread, the RFP software for analysing solicitations and contracts, and for creating and editing proposals. VisibleThread is used by 11 of the top 15 US government contractors. Using VT-Docs and VT-Writer can be game-changing for efficiency and compliance in your documents. For more information, visit VisibleThread.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you are listening. Stay tuned for more insightful discussions on the Optimize podcast.